Pete Buttigieg's town hall touched on a number of topics, but one of the issues that was talked about quite a bit today on the Young Turks main show was the Indiana, or I should say South Bend, Indiana Police Department's tapes, and how some of those tapes from years ago included cops saying racist things. Now, Buttigieg was asked about that. Let's hear what he had to say.
Mayor, my question is straightforward. What are on the secret tapes regarding the demotions of South Bend's Black Police Chief, Darrell Boykins?
So the answer is I don't know. And the reason I don't know is that these tape recordings were made in a way that may have violated the Federal Wiretap Act. That's a federal law that controls when you can and can't record people. And the allegation was that the police chief was using these recordings to try to figure out what was going on with internal rivalries with other police officers, and allegedly broke the Federal Wiretap Act when he did that. That's a law that's punishable by a term in prison. And so I'm not going to violate it, even though I want to know what's on those tapes like everybody else does. Right now, this is going through an incredibly long, frustrating, and expensive legal process that in the end will allow a judge to say whether or not the content of these recordings can be released, so we can figure out whether it's true or whether it's not true, that there's something on there that we need to be concerned about. The reason I demoted the chief was that I found out that he was the subject of a criminal investigation, not from him, but from the FBI. And it made it very hard for me to trust him as one of my own appointees. It was frustrating and painful too, though. He was the first African-American chief in our city's history. And one of the reasons I had asked him to serve in the first place in my administration was a great track record in community policing.
Yeah. So let me just fill in a few blanks. And we did talk about this on the main show, but there were 3 people who were fired, or the African-American police chief in question was demoted by Buttigieg, but there were 2 other individuals who were fired. One of those individuals was the communications director for the South Bend Police Department. She was the woman who actually came across those racist recordings and drew attention to them. And then the second person who was fired by Buttigieg was the city attorney, who apparently did not do enough to block the Indiana State Police from investigating potential racism within the department.
So this is a big problem for Buttigieg, and we broke this story on Sunday. People knew about the tapes already, but the parts of the story that we broke, TYT Investigates did, Jonathan Larson reporting, it was that the city attorney was fired, and that's because she. It's not that she even pushed for it. She just allowed a vote where they decided that they were going to investigate the police chief that Buttigieg had put in place of Boykins. And because there was an issue of not responding to back up a fellow police officer who also happened to be Black. And so Buttigieg was apparently mad that she didn't block that investigation because it might get his appointee in trouble, and so that person was fired. That's a huge problem.
And by the way,
enormous problem.
Again, what spurred that investigation was the South Bend Public Safety Board voting unanimously to do that investigation. And so that is a democratic process. You have the board voting unanimously to do something that for some reason or the other, Buttigieg didn't like, and so he fires the city attorney for failing to block that investigation from happening.
So we also got documents in the Karen DePape case, and so she was the second person that we were talking about that was fired, and she's the one who got the tapes in the first place. And so why was she fired? All she did was discover the tapes and tell people, hey, there's a lot of cops talking about, using the N-word and being racist all over these tapes, and Buttigieg fired her.
Right.
That's deeply troubling. We got the documents on it. You should go to tyt.com and read Jonathan Larson's story on it. And so Buttigieg's team responded today by saying, that's unsubstantiated rumors. What are you talking about? We've got the documents on the case. We've got witnesses, we've got sources, etc. So these are not sufficient answers. And him saying, and the federal wiretapping law that he's referring to, that's why he said it might be federal wiretapping. It ain't federal wiretapping. There are cops that were recorded on the job. And that is, you can do that, okay? And so he didn't listen to those tapes. If he didn't, because he didn't want to hear what was on that, because then he'd have to fire a huge portion of the police department, and that would cause a lot of political problems for him in South Bend. Let's keep it real. That appears to be what happened.
Racism in Indiana? Nah, I don't believe it. You know what? What I thought was interesting was how he went to the extent to explain how those wiretapping laws, how that was against the law, and we saw a whole show on HBO about called The Wire that explained it, which many of us know what he's talking about. But how racism wasn't a deal breaker within the law enforcement, within law enforcement in his jurisdiction, wherever he is, that the fact that knowing that some of those officers are exercising racist practices and that we have so many issues with our criminal justice system, which you heard Elizabeth Warren break down, that this is not a figment of our imagination. That's secondary. That's secondary. What's important is that we don't break wiretap laws, because that's more important to him than people being unjustly mistreated by law enforcement where he's from. And like I said, those are the things that I listen for, and those are the things that make me nervous.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, the wiretapping excuse is so flimsy. That's why he couches it in, it might violate federal wiretapping laws. It doesn't. And in the Karen DePape documents, their excuse for why they're not listening to the tapes and not making the tapes public is it might affect prosecutions. Yes, if it's racist cops who are putting people away for being black, it should affect the prosecutions. Maybe they didn't do it.
Yeah, and
that's a huge civil rights issue.
And let me just, I mean, this is obvious, but those cops are paid by the taxpayers in South Bend, Indiana. They have the right to know what those tapes, contain, right?
Look, guys, everybody always looks at things from the white perspective, like, oh, how will it affect the police department? How will it affect Buttigieg's career? How will it affect this and that? How will it affect African Americans who live in South Bend, Indiana? How can we never ask that? If you're a black person living in South Bend, how do you know which cops to trust?
That's right.
How do you know which ones think you're the N-word and are naturally criminal, whether you did something or you didn't do something? How do you know which one? You can't trust any of the cops in South Bend. Instead of not being able to trust some percentage, which we can weed out, et cetera, go through a process, now all of a sudden they're all suspect. So who'd you help?
I'm gonna get me a shirt that says, they never wanna look at the tapes.
Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.